I want to tell you something I never expected to say out loud. That a single voicemail, 43 seconds long, can make you see 22 years of your life from the wrong end of a telescope. It came on a Wednesday morning in early October. The kind of morning that feels like the whole province is exhaling. Leaves coming down off the maples along Riverside Drive, sky the color of old pewter. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal when my phone buzzed on the counter. A voicemail from my wife. Not a call, a voicemail. She'd recorded it instead of talking to me, and I didn't understand why until I pressed play. Don't bother coming to the cabin this weekend. Jess wants it to be just her and Dwayne and the real family. You'd only make things uncomfortable. Real family. I stood there with the wooden spoon dripping oatmeal onto the floor and listened to it twice more. Same words, same flat delivery. Like she was telling me the grocery store was out of coffee. Outside, a chickadee landed on the feeder I'd built and filled every November for the last 15 years. I watched it eat. I didn't move. Before I tell you what I did next, you should know a few things about how we got here. Because this didn't start on a Wednesday in October. It started the year I met her, back when Jess was 9 years old and small enough that her feet didn't touch the floor when she sat at the kitchen table. Her name was Maureen. She'd been on her own with Jess for 2 years by the time we met at a curling bonspiel in Guelph. She was funny and direct and a little tired in the way that single parents are tired. Not from lack of sleep, exactly, but from carrying the weight of every decision alone. I liked her immediately. I liked Jess too. That little girl had her mother's stubbornness and her biological father's habit of going quiet when she was thinking hard about something. Her biological father. Dwayne, let me tell you about Dwayne. Dwayne was the kind of man who showed up for the good parts. Birthdays sometimes. Christmas when he felt like it. He'd moved to Kelowna when Jess was 6 and called maybe once a month, then once every few months, then not at all for stretches that Maureen would cover for with careful, vague excuses. Dad's been really busy. Jess would nod and not ask again, and I'd watch her not ask and feel something tighten in my chest. I moved in with Maureen when Jess was 11. I didn't propose to Maureen until Jess was 13, and part of the reason I waited was that I wanted to ask Jess first. Took her out for a beaver tails at the market one Saturday morning, just the two of us. Asked her straight. She looked at me over a pile of cinnamon sugar and said, "Are you going to be around?" I said, "That's the whole point." She nodded once, the way she did when she'd decided something, and went back to eating. We were married the following spring. For 11 years after that, I was around. That's what I can tell you plainly. I drove Jess to skating at 6 in the morning every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 winters running. I sat through every parent-teacher interview. When she got into the nursing program at Western, I made the drive to London with her to move her into residence, carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs in 30-degree heat, and bought her a mini fridge from Canadian Tire because the one they'd promised her hadn't arrived. When she graduated, I was in the 3rd row with a bouquet of flowers I'd wrapped myself because Maureen had forgotten to order any. I paid for things I didn't talk about. The difference between her student loan and her actual tuition. The security deposit on her first apartment in Hamilton. The car, a used Civic, nothing fancy but reliable. When her lease fell through 3 days before she needed it. I didn't make a production of any of it. That wasn't the point. The point was that she needed it and I had it, and that's what you do. Dwayne, meanwhile, had moved back to Ontario about 4 years ago, settled in Ancaster, got a girlfriend, a townhouse, a truck with a good sound system, started showing up for Jess's birthdays again. Jess was 27 by then and old enough to decide what she wanted from him, and I tried very hard not to have opinions about that out loud. But I noticed things. The way Maureen started referring to Jess's parents in a way that included Dwayne. The way holiday plans started to involve checking Dwayne's schedule. The way Jess started calling him Dad. Not in a small, tentative way she'd sometimes called me that, but big and easy and without any weight to it, like it cost her nothing. I tried to tell myself it was fine. People are complicated. Forgiveness is real. Families rearrange themselves. I stood at the kitchen counter on that Wednesday morning in October, with oatmeal cooling in the pot, and listened to my wife's voicemail one more time. You'd only make things uncomfortable. I set the phone face down on the counter. I turned the burner off. I put the oatmeal in the fridge and got dressed for work. I'm a retired site supervisor, but I consult part-time now for a construction firm in Kitchener, 3 days a week, sometimes 4. I drove in on autopilot that morning, shook hands, looked at plans, gave the same opinions I always gave. My phone rang twice. Maureen. I let it go to voicemail both times. At lunch, I sat in my truck in the parking lot off King Street and looked at my own reflection in the window of the building across the road. 63 years old. Hair gone mostly gray. The face of a man who had been useful and patient and quiet about both. I thought about calling my brother. He lives in New Brunswick now, retired early, spends his winters complaining about the snow even though he chose to live there. He would have listened. He's good at that. But I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I drove after work to the TD branch on Weber Street where I'd been banking since 1987. Same building, different carpeting. The woman at the counter, young with glasses and a very organized desk, pulled up my accounts without any fuss. I asked to see everything. The checking, the joint savings, the automatic payments. She turned the screen so I could see. There it was. The cabin charges, property tax, hydro, insurance, the dock maintenance I'd paid for in August. Maureen's name on the joint account. My name as primary account holder, as it had always been. I asked for a printed summary and she printed it without asking why. I sat in the truck for a while after that, the papers on the passenger seat, the parking lot humming around me. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan 3 spots over. A kid on a bike cut through the lot too fast and she yelled after him and he ignored her entirely. I watched all of this and breathed. That evening, I didn't go home right away. I drove out to the Legion on Lancaster Street instead. I've been going there on and off since my father used to take me in the 80s, back when you could still smell cigarette smoke embedded in the wood. It's cleaner now. Still smells like draft beer and old conversations. My old friend Walt, not a young man either, 74, walked with a cane since his hip replacement, was at his usual spot at the end of the bar. He looked at me when I sat down and said nothing for a moment, just signaled the bartender for 2. "You've got that face," he said. "What face?" "The one you had when the foreman took credit for your project in '98. I told him the short version, the voicemail, the words, what they meant and what they didn't say out loud. Walt listened the way old men who've lived through things listen. Not jumping ahead, not offering solutions, just taking it in. He was quiet for a bit. Then, people don't say the quiet part out loud until they think they don't need you anymore. I stared at my beer. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet, but I'm done pretending I don't understand what's happening." He nodded. Drank. We watched the hockey highlights on the TV above the bar. Neither of us had anything more useful to say, and we knew it, and that was fine. I went home. Maureen was on the couch watching something on her iPad with her headphones in. She didn't take them out when I came in. I stood in the doorway of the living room for a moment, looking at the room. The bookshelves I'd built. The repaired window frame I'd done last spring. The framed photo of the 3 of us, me, Maureen, and Jess, from Jess's convocation, sitting slightly off-center on the wall, because Maureen had insisted on hanging it herself and didn't like me pointing out the level. I went to bed. The next morning, before she was up, I opened the filing cabinet in the spare room. I'm organized by nature. Site work teaches you that. There are files for everything, house, vehicles, insurance, taxes going back to 1991. I found what I was looking for in a blue folder in the 3rd drawer. The cabin. I bought that cabin. I want to be clear about this because it matters. Maureen's family had talked about buying property up near Georgian Bay for years before I came along. But the cabin on Severn Sound didn't exist until I found the listing, arranged the financing, and signed the papers. My name is on the title. I did that deliberately, not out of distrust, but out of habit. When you've worked in construction your whole life, you understand that paperwork tells the truth even when people don't. In the folder were the original purchase documents, the renovation receipts, the deck I'd built, the dock, the new septic system 3 years ago. I added everything up in a notebook, the way I used to do takeoffs on job sites. It took me an hour. The number at the bottom of the page was not small. I sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a while. My phone had 2 texts from Maureen, sent last night after I'd gone to bed. One said we should talk. The other said I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I put the phone back on the desk and went to make coffee. I didn't call a lawyer that week. I called my brother first. He answered on the second ring, said hang on while he moved somewhere quieter, then came back. "Tell me," he said. So I did, all of it. Not just the voicemail, but the years before it. The pattern I'd been too busy to see or too stubborn to name. The way Dwayne had come back into the picture and everyone had simply rearranged to include him without anyone asking where I fit. The money I'd never mentioned because mentioning it felt small, and now the not mentioning of it felt like a trap I'd built for myself. My brother listened. He didn't say I told you so, even though he'd had quiet reservations about Maureen years ago that he'd kept mostly to himself. He said, "What do you want to happen?" I said, "I don't want to blow anything up. But I'm 63 years old and I'm done living in a house where I'm the utility and not the family." He was quiet. Then, "So stop being the utility." I found a lawyer through the credit union. They'd recommended her before for something unrelated and I'd kept the card. Her office was in a low brick building on Charles Street. She was sharp and unhurried and she read through the documents I brought without commenting until she'd finished. "The cabin's in your name," she said. "I know, you can list it. What about my wife? She lives there periodically. That's not the same as ownership. She'd have standing to contest the marriage asset question, but the title is clear." She said, "What are you hoping for here?" I said, "Clarity. I've been operating on assumptions for a long time and I'd like to stop." She nodded like she'd heard that sentence before, in different words, from different people. She probably had. I didn't list the cabin immediately. I drove up there alone that weekend. The weekend I'd been uninvited from, not to cause trouble, but because it was my property, and the dock needed winterizing. I pulled up the ramp, drained the lines, covered the boat. The lake was still and flat and cold, the kind of cold that feels like an announcement. I stood on the dock for a long time in my jacket, watching the loons, not thinking about anything in particular. On the drive back down, somewhere between Midland and Barrie, I made up my mind. Maureen called 6 times that week. I answered once, on a Thursday evening when I was tired enough to want the conversation over. She said, "You're being dramatic." I said, "I've been very calm." She said Jess was just nervous about the weekend. She wanted things simple. I said, "I understand." She said, "So you understand?" I said, "I understand that simple, for your family, means without me." She started to say something about how I was misreading it, how I always did this, how I made everything about myself. I held the phone loosely and listened to the way her voice climbed when she was working up to something. I'd heard that climb for 22 years. When she stopped, I said, "Maureen, the cabin's going on the market." The line went very quiet. She said, "You can't do that?" I said, "My name's on the deed." She said, "We built that place together." I said, "I bought that place. You furnished it." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Dwayne thinks you're being vindictive." I almost laughed. Dwayne, who had paid support intermittently for 4 years before stopping entirely and only resumed when Maureen stopped covering for him. Dwayne, who had shown up for the graduation dinner and ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. Dwayne, who had driven from Ancaster to Georgian Bay in my family's cabin to sit on the dock I'd built and feel like a father again. I said, "Dwayne's welcome to his opinion." I hung up. I sat in the kitchen. The chickadee was back at the feeder outside. I watched it for a while, and then I called the real estate agent. Her name was Beverly. I'd met her at a neighborhood association meeting years ago, and she'd impressed me then. No nonsense, organized, didn't waste words. She came out to the cabin on a Thursday with a clipboard and sensible boots and walked through the place with the same quiet focus I used to bring to site inspections. She didn't ask why. She just noted the condition of everything, the recent upgrades, the view, the dock. "Good bones," she said. "Well maintained." "This won't sit." She smiled slightly. "Fast," she said. The listing went up the following Tuesday. By Friday there were 3 offers. I was eating breakfast when Maureen texted me a screenshot of the listing with a single line below it. "Is this real?" I sent back, "Yes." She called immediately. I didn't answer. Jess called an hour later. Jess didn't yell. That was the part I hadn't prepared for. She was very quiet on the phone, the way she used to get quiet when she was a girl working through something difficult. She said, "I didn't know you were going to do this." I said, "I know." She said, "Is this because of the cabin weekend?" I said, "It's because of a lot of things that I was quiet about for a long time." She said, "I never meant for you to feel pushed out." I said, "I know that too." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. She said, "You paid for so much." Mom never really explained it to me the way. She just didn't explain it. I said, "I wasn't keeping a ledger, Jess. I was being your father." The word landed between us and sat there. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Can I come see you?" "Not with Mom, just me." I said, "Yes." She came on a Saturday. We walked along the river trail, the one near the university that I'd taken her on when she was 13 and going through a hard patch. She wore a coat I didn't recognize, grown up and belted. She looked like herself, only more so. She said, "He's not you. You know that, right?" I said, "I'm not trying to compete with him, Jess." She said, "I know. That's what I mean. He's there now, and I got caught up in it, trying to have a normal thing with him. And I think somewhere it made it easier to pretend we were all just, I don't know, simple." I said, "I understand wanting that." She said, "You were never difficult to have around. I just made you feel like you were." I didn't answer right away. We walked. A dog came bounding up from the path ahead, tail going, and its owner came jogging after it, apologizing. We both stopped to let it happen. After it had gone, I said, "You were 9 years old the first time you asked me if I was going to stick around." She nodded. She remembered. I said, "I told you that was the whole point." She was quiet, not the bad kind of quiet, the kind where someone is holding something carefully. We got coffee at a place near the trail that had too many chalkboard signs and not enough seating. Stood outside with our cups in the cold. She told me things she hadn't said before, that she'd watched me for years doing the quiet work of showing up, that she'd told Dwayne once that her stepfather had never missed a school event and he'd gone strange and quiet, that she'd felt guilty about that, felt like she'd betrayed him somehow, and spent a long time trying to balance something that wasn't hers to balance. I said, "That wasn't fair to you either." She said, "No, it wasn't." We hugged when she left. A real one, not brief. She held on a little longer than I expected, and I let her. The cabin sold in 10 days. Young couple from Mississauga. The wife was a nurse and the husband worked in tech. They had a daughter who was almost 4 and had never been to Georgian Bay. Beverly handled the close and sent me a text after that, just said, "Done. Good for you." I accepted the offer on a Monday morning, sitting in the same chair at the kitchen table where I'd received the voicemail 3 weeks earlier. The table had always felt temporary somehow, like we'd set it up in transit. It felt less temporary now that I knew I wasn't waiting for something anymore. Maureen moved through the process with a lawyer of her own, as I'd expected. The cabin was a marriage asset question, her lawyer said. Mine said, show me the title. That was more or less how it went. The sale went through. The split of the proceeds was not what Maureen wanted. But the paperwork told the truth, like it always does. She didn't speak to me for several weeks after that. I used the silence to start sleeping better and cooking things I actually wanted to eat instead of what was easiest. I still live in the house on Riverside Drive. We're separated now. Not divorced, not yet, but separated in the way that happens when two people have been honest with each other finally. Too late to fix things, but not too late for it to matter. She's staying with her sister in Brantford. I drive to New Brunswick in the spring to see my brother, and we sit on his porch and drink his bad instant coffee and look at the water. Jess texted me in December. A photo of her and her partner at a Christmas market somewhere downtown. Lights everywhere, the kind of photo people take when they're actually having a good time and not trying to prove it. Below it, she wrote, thinking of you. Merry Christmas, Dad. Not Dad Mark. Just Dad. I looked at that for a long time. I didn't know what to write back, so I wrote, Merry Christmas, kid. You look happy. And then I put the phone down and went and made supper, and the house was quiet. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet felt like mine. There's a thing I've learned, coming out the other side of all this. Something I wish someone had told me 20 years ago, though I'm not sure I would have understood it then. Being needed and being valued are not the same thing. I spent a long time making myself useful and calling it love. The bill paying, the showing up, the carrying of boxes up 3 flights of stairs, all of it was real, all of it was given freely, and I don't regret a single hour of it. But I made the mistake of thinking that because I was necessary, I was seen. If you have spent years quietly keeping something together, a family, a home, a person, and you've started to feel invisible inside it, I want you to hear this. Invisible is a feeling, not a fact. And the moment you stop pretending otherwise, the world rearranges itself around the truth. Sometimes painfully, sometimes slowly, but it does. Your name on that document matters. Your years in that room matter. The chair you always sat in, at the table you always came back to, that matters too. Don't give it up quietly. That's all I'm saying. Don't give it up quietly.